It's the Law.
Welcome to It's the Law, a program produced and presented by the Guyana Association of Women's Lawyers. On this program, we are given an in-depth look at Guyana's laws. The presenter for today is Joan Ann Edgehill-Stewart.
I'm Joan Ann Edgehill-Stewart, Director of Juvenile Justice, also an attorney at law. And so I'm also a child advocate, and I am very passionate about all things children. Thank you so much for having me today, and I'm elated to talk about juvenile justice. So the Juvenile Justice Act came about in 2018, and the act seeks to amend and consolidate the law in relation to criminal justice for juveniles, to make provision for proceedings with respect to juvenile offenders, and to provide establishment of facilities for the custody, education, and rehabilitation of juvenile offenders. It also seeks to repeal the Training Schools Act and the Juvenile Offenders Act. And these acts were important, and the Juvenile Justice Act incorporates all those different types of acts, and that is why we come to the Children's Court. Now, everyone may be thinking, oh, so we have a Children's Court. Where is this Children's Court located? It is located in Crow Street, Georgetown, and primarily we have two magistrates that oversee the Children's Court, Magistrate Singh and Magistrate Bess. And in the Children's Court, it's similarly to a normal court, as the normal courts that we've heard before, the Magistrates Court, but we have tried to make it as user-friendly as much as possible, because the aim of the change in the judicial process as it relates to how we process children and juveniles is to ensure at all times the rehabilitation and reformation of children. It starts from the beginning of their arrest all throughout the judicial process. So when you take some time and you have a walkthrough at the Children's Court at Crow Street, what you'll find is that we have it set up in such a way that the magistrate is there, and it's almost at the same level where the child stands to give evidence, so that we don't have that entire forefront. Normally when you go to court, most persons are so scared of the magistrates or scared of the judges, and we don't want that to happen with the children. We want them to feel as comfortable enough as possible to give their evidence, or if it is that they have to be prosecuted. Now, a question that may come to you is, children are being prosecuted? Who can be prosecuted? If you are a child and you are between the ages of 14 to under 18, then you are considered a juvenile. So according to the Juvenile Justice Act 2018, a juvenile is a person 14 years to under 18 who commits an offense, who comes in to conflict or contact with the law. Now, the Juvenile Justice Act seeks to do three things. The intent and purpose of the act is to rehabilitate, educate, and reintegrate the juvenile into society. So the Juvenile Justice Act gives a list of responsibilities to the Director of Juvenile Justice, which is yours truly. And, I have to work with the principals of the facilities to ensure that every juvenile who is arrested, who is not diverted and is going to be charged and placed before the courts, that when they go through the courts, number one, they have legal representation. So because of that, we have an MOU, a partnership with the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic, and they provide legal representation for all of our juveniles all across Guyana. So this is not just for the Children's Court that is in Crow Street, Georgetown, but if you are residing in the hinterland, if you're residing in Region 10, Region 6, Region 1, wherever you're from, you can be able to have legal representation provided by the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic, that is obviously funded through the Government of Guyana, the Ministry of Home Affairs, or sometimes we have a subvention by UNICEF Guyana, which we're so grateful for their partnership with us. So at the Children's Court, who should be present at the children's court? We want to ensure that we don't have persons who can have their identities outside, publish their names, because we want as much as possible when a child commits an offense, they're offered a second chance. So it's not about keeping things in private and secrecy, but it's in a confidential manner. So we just want to have the magistrate present, we want to have the prosecutor, we want to have their defense counsel and their guardian, and more importantly, the child protection officers and the probation officers. And these officers also play an instrumental role in juvenile justice, because the Child Care Protection Agency provides something called a pre-charge report. And what is a pre-charge report? When a child, or a juvenile I should say, is arrested and the police recognizes, okay, this is not a summary offense, this is an indictable offense, which means they've committed one of the offenses under the scheduled offenses of murder or manslaughter or aggravated burglary or arson, as we've just had the other day with the Madia fire. Once any of those indictable matters, then the juvenile may be arrested and then they'll have to be judicially processed. But it doesn't mean because they've committed an offense, then we turn a blind eye on them and we just forsake them and we leave them in the corner and then we just move on with the other children. We have to ensure that there's justice for the victim and there's also justice for the perpetrator, ensuring that there's a team of persons who are working with them, evaluating them. So we have juveniles right now at the Juvenile Holding Center who are awaiting their matters to start, who have already started their matters at the children's court, but an evaluation is conducted by our psychologists and our psychiatric doctors who evaluate them to understand their state of mind. And all of these reports are recorded in the pre-charge report that assists the DPP of Guyana to ensure, okay, maybe what is the charge that we should levy on this child? Should they be charged in the first place? Or what should really happen? So Child Care Protection Agency has a lot of work. They have a lot of work cut out for them, and we're so grateful for the work that they do in preparing those pre-charge reports. So when the police arrest the juvenile, police has to ensure that those persons are present, that a Child Care Protection Agency or the guardian is present at the station so that they can be able to get the relevant information. And that's why we have these advocacy centers, especially in matters of sexual abuse matters, so the child don't have to be regurgitating the facts, the same thing over and over and over. All the instrumental people, the police, the child protection officers, the probation officers, everybody who needs to take their recordings and their statements and everything are present at the advocacy center. So these are all things in preparation for when the child is judicially processed and has to go to the court. But what happens if a child commits a summary offense matter that is not murder, that is not manslaughter, but it's maybe a petty offense? That child, the purpose of the Juvenile Justice Act, and especially Guyana, that we've signed on and ratified all these different conventions, with the Rights of the Child Convention, the Havana rules, the Riyadh guidelines, the Tokyo rules, all these different rules that are internationally guiding us. These rules are established to ensure that our juveniles are diverted. And diversion basically means diverting the juvenile away from the judicial process. And that's where I come in again to provide diversion programs for the children of Guyana, for the juveniles of Guyana. Presently, we have 20 juveniles at the holding center, and these juveniles, even though they were charged, we want to ensure that their education continues, that they have training so they can learn life skills, so that when they're reintegrated into society, they can become meaningful members of society. For the ones who are not arrested, but they're also sent to diversion, the Guyana Police Force is partnering with the Cops and Faith, and these are a group of persons who are maybe pastors and counselors and mentors who can be able to, especially if a child has anger management, maybe there's an issue at home and they're lashing out at school and they're in constant fights and all of that, that child can be diverted to a counselor instead of being charged, because we don't want to judicially process every child. The whole purpose of the act is to rehabilitate the child. However, this act by no means is just looking to put a plaster on an offense. And most persons persons, because they don't understand the purpose of the act, they seek juvenile justice as, oh, children are committing offenses and nothing is happening to them. And even children I've had to speak to and say, not because you commit offense, nothing will happen to you. So I've had to explain to them that while the law is running its course and justice is being served, in the interim, we want to ensure that your life doesn't stall, that nothing happens to you, but you continue your educational process. Right now, we have one child that is writing CXC, and we're so grateful for that. We have many success stories of juveniles who have come through the holding center, completed, and they're now meaningful members. They have their own businesses. They want to have a barbershop. So many different things that they're doing. The one that is writing CXC right now, one actually completed last year, and he wants a scholarship. So maybe you have to write the Ministry of Public Service. They'll hear from me soon to get a scholarship for him. But we have some other persons who are doing so many good things. So because we kind of publish their names and their faces and their identities, you may not know what's happening, but the program is working. And if you have a juvenile, or if you know of a youth who is at risk, we also have programs for them. So they may not have come into contact with the law, they may not have been arrested, so there was no need for diversion. But we as a team have sought and we've thought about it, and now we have something called the Community Life Skills Program. And the Community Life Skills Program, well, we only have that right now on the Essequibo Coast at NOC. And everybody knows about NOC. Back in the day, it was called like a boys' school. But remember, in the beginning, I said that the Juvenile Justice Act repeals the Training Schools Act. So we no longer are just sending children to the boys' school because they're committed a truancy offense, such as wandering, or they got away from school, or a school dropout. Those offenses we no longer are charging persons for. So the Juvenile Offenders Act is no longer in operation. The Training Schools Act and Sections 15 and 16 of the Education Act. However, the NOC is now deemed an open residential facility under the Juvenile Justice Act. And what does that mean? Juveniles who are arrested, who were processed through the children's court, which means a pre-charge report was given, DPP recommended charges. They had a fair trial, which means they had a right to be heard. They had legal representation. Everything as it relates to their fair trial was upheld, and they had a sentencing. The probation report gave a pre-sentence report, and then they are sent to an open residential facility or a closed residential facility, depending on the degree of the offense. At NOC, the Act seeks to call NOC an open residential facility because these are supposed to be juveniles who've committed summary offenses. However, we are still awaiting on a policy direction to have a secured residential facility. So in the interim, we used a portion of NOC, because it's a big compound, to secure juveniles who've committed indictable matters. So I want to assure the Guyanese populace, it is not when a juvenile commits offense, nothing happens to them and we just give them a slap on the wrist and give them a warning, and then that's it. There are systems put in place. The government of Guyana are putting systems in place to ensure that the victims also get justice. But however, as it relates to the mind of these juveniles, we want to ensure that even though they would have committed a crime, that we're still ensuring that we have programs put in place. I just want to talk a little bit more about the programs that we have at the Holding Center and at NOC. Now, right now at the Juvenile Holding Center, we've also partnered with Blossom Inc. and we have another Practical Christian Ministries. We have some other programs, Child Link, we also partner with, and they provide trauma-focused therapies for the juveniles, and they also look at behavior modification for the juveniles. We also look at programs that will be able to give skills in anger management, dealing with conflict resolution, because we believe that's a major thing. And maybe everyone in Guyana needs some conflict resolution life skills, because every day we have to deal with conflict. I mean, sometimes I'm driving on the road and somebody's honking a horn at me, and you want to get out and you want to scream at them, but you got to be like, take your deep breaths, because so many things can trigger us. And that's what we want to do with the juveniles. We want to let them identify what are some of the triggers that they have so they don't act out, because when they're reintegrated into society, we don't want to see them again back into the program because they have not worked on what are some of the things that triggered them. So these are some of the programs that we have. Sometimes I listen in to gain some insight because I need a lot of work too. But I believe that the program is working. I believe it's a good program. We have a lot of testimonials on our Facebook page. If you type in Juvenile Justice Department Guyana, you'll see a lot of parents on our page talking about they're so happy for the program because it's working for the juveniles. The system at court is working. The diversion programs are working. And so when we talk about the trauma-focused therapy programs, I don't want to talk a lot more on the Blossom Inc. program, but what we saw is that especially juveniles who would have committed rape, allegedly committed rape, or were actually victims of any sexual assault matters, they also need that type of therapy and working with that, because if you've been raped, that can trigger some other things and you may cause to be angry, and that's how you're involved in a fight, and that's how maybe you're doing drugs and some other things. And that brings me to the other court also, because we have the Juvenile Drug Treatment Court, which is an excellent initiative by the judiciary. We want to thank our Chancellor and our Chief Justice of Guyana, our Acting Chancellor and Chief Justice, because they have instrumentally put that court together, and it deals with juveniles who have committed offenses. They're narcotics or they're dealing with alcohol, and so because we recognize it's a problem, they can be referred to the drug treatment court. But however, in order for you to be diverted, you as a person have to admit that you were wrong and then consent to the diversion. Just like if you were doing, you're an alcoholic, you have to say, I am an alcoholic. So you have to admit that you have a problem in order for the program to work. So it can be, we're diverting this child because it was a petty offense. They have to admit that they stole this phone. They have to admit that they're doing drugs, they're doing the ecstasy or the weed or whatever, and they need the help. Consent to the diversion, or consent to be referred to the drug treatment court, and then that process, they will be assessed, and then that program will work. Now, the drug treatment court is so instrumental and it's so important because it's not just you trying to get away from the offense that you've done and you're going to this nice place and you're getting to sleep and wake up and eat food free of cost, but you have to put in the work. They have a rigid program put in place, and I'm guessing some other time you're going to invite them to talk about that, so I won't talk a lot about that. But their program that they have put in place is to ensure that you adhere. I'm sure that they have regular testing that is being done to ensure that they adhere to that program. And similarly with the diversion programs, we have testing tools to ensure that our juveniles are adhering, that they're learning, and that they're implementing those programs. At the children's court, even though it's just the one court that we have at Crow Street, every other court that Ms. Lal would have referred to in the magistrate district, or even in the Supreme Court, but in the magistrate district, those courts can be transferred to a children's court. So we may be in Mahaico or Covent John, or we may be in Essequibo or in Berbice, wherever we may be, and we don't have a children's court there. But what we will do is hear those matters in camera. And what does in camera mean? In camera basically means that everybody else that doesn't belong to this matter, they have to bounce. They have to leave. For want of a better word, Guyanese terms, they have to leave. And just again, the magistrate is present, the prosecutor, the attorney, the representatives for the juvenile, the child protection officers, and their guardians. So regardless of where your district is, you might be thinking, oh my, I'm all the way in the hinterland, I'm in region 8, region 9, whatever, and I can't get to I'm in Madi or wherever you may be. I can't get Bartica. I can't get to the children's court in Georgetown. But within your district, those courts can be transferred to a children's court and be heard in camera. Now, some of the other functions of the Juvenile Justice Act, I know we've spoken lengthily about the diversion programs and the courts and what is offered, but primarily we are tasked with training police officers how to deal with these matters. Just recently, we've had a lot of juveniles who've committed offenses. It was all over Facebook. People are talking about it. They want to know what is going to happen. What is going to happen to the girl who was charged with the fire? What's going to happen to the 4 boys who allegedly committed a fire right after that in another dorm? What happens to them? And the police officers have to know, because remember, we started earlier and we talked about a juvenile is considered a person 14 years to under 18 years. However, a juvenile or a child can also be charged if they're under 14, and that is critical for us to establish. And once an evaluation is done and the DPP is satisfied that all the elements of the offense has occurred and this person can be charged, because the 4 boys, I may have taught them, I don't know, they probably would have heard, oh, you have to be 14 and then you could be charged, but they're 13 years old. But guess what? They're also charged. So this is a notice for all children of Guyana, regardless of whether you're in a gang, you're in school, or whatever, and you think, oh, it's only a certain timeline and it's only a certain offense and you can be charged. Regardless of, however, even though the Act says 14 to under 18, once an evaluation is done and the court and the DPP is satisfied, the police have done their work, Child Protection have done their pre-charge report, you can also be charged. So this is a fair warning to all my young people in Guyana, to let you know, because we have those 4 boys and they were charged. However, we are working with them to understand what is happening in their minds. They're integrated into the classroom setting in the facility, and we are doing a lot of work with them, in addition to the other children that we have. But quickly, with the training for the police officers, we have developed a training manual, and the training manual seeks to especially from the beginning, letting persons have an awareness why it is that we have juvenile justice in Guyana, why it is that we're not using our old acts of a Juvenile Offenders Act and our Training Schools Act, why we don't have the boys' school anymore. It is to establish, let them understand what is the concept, the mindset of the world. The world is evolving, and we want to understand that it's not from just penal justice anymore, where we're looking for now more of reformative justice. We want to reform individuals. Their minds have to be reformed. And so with the training for the police officers, they can understand these different conventions that we've signed on to, and what it is, the purpose of those conventions, and their responsibilities as it relates to that. The Juvenile Justice Act or the department has primarily 4 functions. It is to prevent crime wherever possible, and that's where we work with the police officers and the CPGs and the neighborhood policing, and we even train social workers and probation officers. But where it is that we cannot prevent crime, we have to intervene, and this is where crime has occurred. And we also have the function of diversion and supervision. So with the 4 components of the act and the department and the purposes of that, the persons that we have to liaise with primarily is the Guyana Police Force, and their work, they need to be fully aware of what it is that they can do when they have come into contact with a juvenile who has been in conflict with the law. They need to know what are some of the diversion programs that are available to them, because that's a main issue. Like, they don't know where they can send a child if they're all the way in Linden. And that's why we need all the youth groups in Guyana to maybe contact us so that we can have a register put together, because I've been going around all the regions. What we do have is the police have youth groups, and we've been working with the police youth groups to have mentorship programs so that these children who are at risk, they can also be integrated into these programs. So the police are, I'm maybe about 1,500 persons, police officers we've trained so far since 2019 to now. And yeah, that deserves a clap, yes. And we've seen tremendous amount of work being done with the police. We have some of them because of the rotation program. We train them and then they have to leave and they have to go somewhere else, and then we have to go retraining. So it's something that I'm rallying for, to have juvenile justice units set up at the police stations, so we can have persons who are already stationed at the station, and so we don't have to keep retraining every time. But we want to thank all the players of the Juvenile Justice Act, all the stakeholders who partake in the entire system, because it takes a village, and it really does take a village. It's just, we thank the family members, because those family members who have not deserted their children at the center, but come in and interact with them and they talk with them and they encourage them and counsel them. We want to thank those persons. Our teachers, especially our correctional teacher, she works assiduously with our juveniles at the center. We want to thank our magistrates, the entire judiciary, because it takes patience and tolerance to be able to speak with them, to come down to their level, to understand primarily what is happening. And that's why we have to liaise with the Ministry of Education, so that their education officers and welfare officers, they can also be able to give us information what is happening. So it's an entire network, and I think everybody has to be able to be a part of that. I know Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport, they have their trade programs in Sophia Compound. We want to be able to soon, I hope Minister Charles Ramsey will give me the approval to be able to have the juveniles there also partake in the joinery workshops and the welding and the plumbing and all of that, so that they can have tools. Our Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, he has a Fresh Start initiative where when you leave the prison system or these facilities, you can be able to get a kit so that you can be able to, when you, if it is that you did joinery or masonry or whatever it is that you did, you can be able to get those tools and you can be able to start a job too. So it's an entire it's an excellent initiative. It's a collaborative work within all the parties, and it is something that I'm passionate about. And I implore all of Guyana to get to understand juvenile justice, allow the system to work, and let us continue to reform our juveniles. Thank you.
You have been listening to It's the Law, a program produced and presented by the Guyana Association of Women's Lawyers. The contents of this program are not to be taken instead of legal advice.